This is going to be a very brief look at second language acquisition and second language acquisition history. The question really is, what do we know about how languages are learned? I'd like to credit my colleagues Dr. Arnie Case and Bridget Green for their contributions to this. If we look at pretty much any area of the world, for example, here we have modern-day China and Mongolia and Tibet, we notice two things. One, tremendous linguistic diversity. In the 21st century, there are probably about 6,000 languages spoken around the world. And even in this area, which is a large area admittedly, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of languages spoken. So linguistic diversity is something that we notice everywhere, and of course with that comes multilingualism. So the norm around the world is for people to speak more than one language. So that means that people have been learning languages for centuries, and most of the time the impetus behind that are forces like trade and negotiation, the spread of religions, politics and government, and scholarship. And of course, we shouldn't forget war and colonization. So when people started to look at how to study a language and how to, rather than just sort of ad hoc languages that spring up when two different language groups come into contact, the approach taken was straightforward translation. So we try to find what a word or a phrase means in one language and write that down somewhere so that we can make dictionaries and prescriptive grammars that can aid others in doing the same thing. That method is called grammar translation, and it's probably still today the most common way of teaching any language. So the idea basically is we give you a vocabulary and a grammar, and then you would be able to look at a piece of written text and decipher it or translate it into your language or vice versa. But the study of how people learn languages is relatively new. Most people today would put the study of second language acquisition at starting in about the 1960s. Before we have a look at that, we should see what the common understanding of first language acquisition is, because there are some parallels. So a naive theory, or at least a common theory about first language acquisition, is that babies simply imitate their caregivers in much way the same way that a parrot imitates its caregivers. So for example, we would have a mother or caregiver reading a book or saying something like, Papa went to the store, and the child would repeat, Papa went to the store, and in that context understand the meaning of those words and simply repeat it in order to learn. Well, let's break that down a little bit. Let's see what actually happens in first language acquisition. So between 5 and 10 months, most babies will start to babble. That means making sounds that are consonants and vowels usually. And what's interesting about this is that babies seem to babble all over the world, seem to make the same kinds of sounds. So you could say that babbling is a universal, or at least the sounds that babies make are universals. Now, at this stage, you might have input such as a caregiver saying, "You're such a beautiful baby," and the output is ba ba ba. Now, we have no idea what that output means, but presumably it means something. Why should a baby make a noise at all at that point? So, after that first stage, we have a silent period where children will understand far, far more than they're able to communicate. If you've been around a 1-year-old or somewhere between 1 and 2 years old, you'll see that babies can totally understand what's going on. And in fact, many parents teach their babies, young babies, sign language at this point because they're able to gesture much more easily than they're able to articulate any recognizable words. So if you say to a young baby, "Where's your belly?" you might get the response of her pointing at her belly. Similarly, if you say something like, "Want to go bye-bye," she'll understand that and run and get her coat. This is usually called the silent period because babies are not actually communicating in words and phrases at this point, but it's not really silent at all. There's a lot of noise coming out of babies, and some of that noise is vaguely recognizable. So, for example, my daughter, when she was probably about 12 months maybe, said things like Bagabaurai and Dada Mama Baba, and she certainly said it with conviction, and we assumed that it meant something to her, even though we had no idea what it meant. So another change that's occurred by now is that by this period, 10 to 12 months, and starting at about 6 months, babies start to isolate the sounds that they hear in their local speech community. This is not to say that they can't learn other sounds, and of course, even at this period, if you train babies or expose them basically to another set of sounds like Mandarin, they will absolutely recognize those sounds. But what's basically happening is that they're using the sounds in their input to create a sort of sound palette. They're saying, these are the sounds that mean something, other sounds don't mean anything. So I don't have to pay attention to them. If you, on Blackboard, if you go to the second language acquisition folder, there is a short video by Patricia Kuhl talking about how children take statistics of their local sound at this point and form that sound palette. In the second stage of language acquisition, this is when children begin production. This stage is usually between 12 and 18 months. And here's some examples from about 14 months. You'll say, "Night night," and the baby or the toddler will go, "Night night," and pick up a phone and go, "Do," which in the case of my daughter meant hello, and so on. If you go into the folder on Blackboard, there is a file, a video file of Deb Roy talking about how his son slowly over a period of, I think, 9 months, began to learn and then to master the sound or the word water. And please stop now and go and watch that.